Well, I think that I'm worried that there's only a disaster for everything.
You gotta drink it.
Want everybody, hey, see the misused and everything.
It's just,
It's one of the most.
all right, everybody, welcome
No, Midwest.
to this,
You see, they have the
this
money.
panel discussion conversation with our legendary Hyde Park Booksellers. I'm Michael Sopka, the president of the Hyde Park Historical Society, and I really do welcome you all here. It's nice to see you. We're very fortunate to have a great lineup here today. I would first like to introduce Stephen Lucy, who has been so kind as to host this event in this beautiful venue.
Welcome to 57th Street Lines. As many of you know, this was a bookstore for many years, run by, in part, Doug Wilson. So it's super nice to host this event in this space. If anyone, just some housekeeping, if anyone needs to use the restroom, there's one in the back room. You're welcome to use it. And I hope you come back for other events we do here. We're happy to host the Historical Society. We're also doing an event with the Seminary Co-op next week on Tuesday. Someone who wrote a book about wine, Jane Lopez, that's on Tuesday at 5:36. And then we do tastings every week, wine, beer, and cocktails. So check out our website for the schedule or ask in front. And I think that's it. Thanks.
All right. Okay, the way this is going to work is I'm going to give a brief bio of each of our panelists today. And then Mary, who will be our moderator, is going to ask each one of them to add maybe an anecdote or so to what is kind of a broad bio. And then we have some discussion topics that we'll go into after each of our guest booksellers has had their say. So I'm going to start with Jack Cella. He was the general manager of the Seminary Co-op Bookstores for 43 years. He retired in 2013 and moved to Duluth, Minnesota. During his tenure, Jack oversaw the move of the co-op from 5757 South University Avenue to a new and larger space at the Gifford House at 5751 South Woodlawn. As general manager, he also saw the co-op's membership grow to 50,000, with a reputation as one of the country's leading academic bookstores and the establishment of 2 branch stores at 57th Street Books and the Newberry Library. For many members, as well as for the bookselling community at large, Jack's name was synonymous with the store. Okay, succeeding Jack is Jeff Deutsch, who is the current general manager of the Seminary Co-op Bookstore and has been so since 2014. Prior to Seminary, Jeff was at Stanford University, where he served as the director of stores at the Stanford Bookstore Group. That's the entire bookstore group at Stanford University. Previously, he led the Cal student store at the University of California, Berkeley. Jeff has a long association with the Seminary Co-op, having first visited the store as a teenager. The store's atmosphere and extraordinary selection of titles left an indelible mark on his memory, so indelible that he left a nice job and a much nicer climate in Chicago to come here. An avid reader, Jeff grew up in a house of books and worked in libraries as a teenager before beginning his bookselling career. He is a firm believer in the seminary's future, in spite of current challenges, and values the many contributions of the store staff, the community of members, and the store's board of directors. Moving on to Brad Jonas. Brad is the managing co-owner of Powell's Books, Chicago, the area's largest independent dealer in quality used, bargain, antiquarian, and out-of-print books. The company includes retail, online, and wholesale divisions. Since 1970, the retail store in Hyde Park has specialized in academic and scholarly books. Brad is aware of the fact that Powell's reflects the unique nature of the Hyde Park community, keen on its interest in serious books. Powell's Books Wholesale, which sells to the trade only, has over 16,000 titles in stock, making it the country's largest distributor of academic bargain books. And I have been to Brad's warehouse. It reminded me of the final scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you just see row upon row upon row of gardens forever. It's huge. Okay. Brad is also the co-founder of the annual trade show, Chicago International Remainder and Overstock Book Exposition, best known by its acronym CIRO. Okay, thank you. Booksellers and other retailers from around the world come to Serobi to buy bargain books for their stores. Now nationally, Brad has been a speaker at Book Expo America, the largest annual book fair in the United States. And last but not least, for our booksellers, is Doug Wilson. Doug, along with his wife Jill, is the current owner of O'Gara and Wilson, Chicago's oldest bookstore, which was once located in this very space and is now located in Chesterton, Indiana. Doug began his career as a book scout, selling to the renowned used bookseller Joe O'Gara in order to fund his own book buying habit. O'Gara quickly recognized his eye for books, and Wilson soon rose from apprentice to an integral part of the store. The bookstore had occupied 57th Street location since at least 1913 until 2013, when it moved to Indiana. The business, which was once called Woodward's, actually dates to 1882, but had different locations in the city. Doug proudly continues to carry on the tradition of used book selling as an alumnus of the University of Chicago. And finally, our moderator, Mary Rowles, who has spent her entire career in the book industry, is a publisher's consultant and representative. Her career has been primarily in the area of sales, selling to booksellers throughout the Midwest from her base in Chicago. Mary has long been familiar with the bookstore community in Hyde Park, having called upon the book buyers, Jack Cella included, at both Seminary Co-op and 57th Street Books and the University of Chicago bookstore since the late 70s. I'm dating all of us here. It is what it is. In addition, she sold some books to Brad Jonas at the UIC, Printers Row, and Lincoln Park locations. Mary has also been a book buyer herself at a noted independent bookstore on the North Shore, and in another area of the book world, worked as a publisher development manager for the first business specifically created to represent titles from independent presses to the book trade. So this is our panel, and I hand it over to Mary.
So that was the official biographies. Now we'll just get a little bit of flavor from various people. We'll start with our senior and furthest flung.
Oldest. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. When coming down yesterday, I realized my bookselling career was hyper-local, within the space of about 3 blocks, spent almost entirely. But apropos of the introduction, I'm trying to I want to tell some anecdotes about the history of the Seminary Co-op store in Hyde Park. I came to the University of Chicago as a grad student in 1967 and began working part-time at the Seminary Co-op sometime in 1968, I think. And gradually that part-time work sort of squeezed out any academic work. The neighborhood had a fair number of independent bookstores at that time, new bookstores. There was Jack Mossoff's Book Center in Harper Court. There was the Book Nook in the Hyde Park Shopping Center. Lane and Jim Staver's bookstore at 57th and Kimbar. And I'm sure others that I've forgotten. But Chicago as a whole was really dominated by trucks and print offices, with Barbara's bookstore on Wells maybe a very distant second competitor. The co-op grew over time as more people joined it and made suggestions. People in this community made suggestions about what we could stock and bought books from the co-op and invested. They became members of the cooperative. When I joined in '68, I think I was member 1,600 something members. Like I said, there were over 50,000 at some point. One of the biggest events in the history of the co-op was a phone call in late 1982 from Dev Bowley. Many of you who probably know Devereaux Bowley. Very avid Hyde Park preservationist, but somebody with an extremely practical bent as well. he called and asked if we would be at all interested in running a bookstore, a second store, in the basement of his building at 57th and Kimmark. I said it was completely, we hadn't been thinking about expanding at all, but we were, those of us at the co-op were very well aware of the things we should be doing and weren't doing. So I went over and saw him. He showed me the first room of the location, where there was a bookstore, Helene's Davis bookstore. And I said, well, we'd be certainly interested in the location, but this space is really not big enough for what we want to do. We want to run, if we could open up anything else, it would have to be a bookstore aimed at the entire south side of Chicago. With Hyde Park as a focus, but aimed broadly at the south side. And also we wanted to do things that we weren't able to do, for instance, and most importantly, children's books. And that location was just not big enough. So Dev's response was, well, let's look through the rest of the basement. The basement went all the way back to the alley from 57th Street, but it was 4 distinct rooms. They weren't connected at all. And at the end of the tour, I told Dev, well, I can't speak for the co-op, but I can make a strong case to the board that this would be something to do, but only if you would prepare the space for us. Knock down the walls between the rooms, making sure the building didn't collapse and get it ready so we could do build-out. He said he would. So I took this proposal to the bookstore's board. They had, I think, several meetings, at least several meetings about it. And then decided we wanted to go ahead as long as Dev would agree to do what he said, he would do. And there were several things we had to do first before we could sign a lease. One, we had to figure out how we were going to pay for it. So we put together a one-page sheet and brought it over to Tim Goodsell at the Hyde Park Bank, said we needed $150,000, and described what we wanted to do. As it turned out, $150,000 wasn't enough. But if you remember the early 1980s, interest rates were through the roof. We did get the loan, paying, I think, 13% interest. Paid it back in 3 years. So we got the okay for the loan. We needed input from customers about what they wanted to see in the local bookstore. I could mention endless names, but I want to mention a few that were really essential to the founding of 57th Street Books. First and foremost is somebody who is here, Rebecca Janowitz. And her sister as well, Naomi. Others, Ted Cohen made some very good suggestions. Bob Strang, a lab school teacher, was extremely strong in what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And he remained that way throughout the existence of the co-op store, throughout his life. David Durb's a lab school teacher. Bob Rosenthal, a special collections person at the university, was very, made lots of good suggestions. Then we had to decide on how to build, once the space was ready for us, we had to decide how to build it out. At the old location, we had built all the shelves ourselves, and that would not work in a more public location. The shelves at the old store were meant to be hidden so people would see the books, but we wanted something better at 57th Street Books. Howard Cohen ran a used bookstore at that time, Booksellers Row on Lincoln Avenue, next to the Biograph. It was just a spectacularly good-looking store. And I went up and asked him, who built the bookshelves for you? He said, I'm not going to tell you, because I don't know if they want to do anything like that again. So I said, okay, well, just if you see them, let them know that we would like to talk to them about building the shelves for us. About a week later, Chip Davenport, whom I knew as a customer, taught in the basic program. He and his wife lived in Hyde Park. He came in and said, I hear you want to talk to me about bookshelves. He was the builder. He said, I said, yes. Not only did he build and design the bookshelves, he designed the space for us. He was absolutely essential to what went into that place. The last thing was negotiating a lease. And the lease, Claire Pencil was on the bookstore's board at that time, a lawyer in Hyde Park who lived about a block from here. She and Dev, who was also a lawyer, negotiated the lease, but it ended up being about 13 or 14 pages long, not a legalism in the lease, until it was written by two Hyde Parkers. Anyway, we signed, well, I was ready to sign the lease and get going on this, when Deb mentioned, well, there's one final step you have to take. The building is not really owned by me. It's owned by my mother. So he said, you have to pass her approval before she'll let you sign a lease. Oh. Because Mrs. Bowley lived in a beautiful townhouse at the northwest corner of 57th and Kimbark.
56.
And I went over there with some trepidation, led by Deb. The house was very dark, although it was spectacular inside. But I evidently passed the test because she said we signed the lease and mortgaged the co-op's future. Then we had to find a staff. We ended up with great people. Rodney Powell was the bookstore's first manager. 57th Street Books' his first manager, and he really set the course of that store. A course that I think it stayed true to throughout its existence. The store opened on October 22nd, 1983, almost 36 years ago. The opening day, I think we did $4,000 or $5,000 in sales, and this community has supported that store through good times and bad, continually for almost 36 years. It's been the success of that store and the success of both co-op stores is really owed to the support we've gotten from Hyde Park booksellers, not uncritical support. I mean, support from people who will pat you on the back when you're doing something well, but will also make sure you know when you're not doing something well. I'm sorry this is going on too long, but I'm almost done. In 1984, Fred Hoxie and Jim Grossman from the Newberry Library asked if we would be interested in opening up a store on the north side of Chicago, and it was a store completely without risk. We could inventory it entirely from the Hyde Park stores. We just drove books up 3 or 4 times a week and took books back. The lease was a percentage of sales, so it really was a very straightforward location for a very interesting store in a good location. So the board, without much qualification, said yes to that. Once again, the question is, how would we do build out? Once again, we wanted to make it look good, and the library, the lobby of the Newberry Library is it's an elegant spot. We asked Big Fish Furniture, local furniture builder of local and no longer in existence, unfortunately, to do the build-out design, and they used beautiful wood for the shelves. Did a great design. Beautiful wood for the shelves that, as I remember the story, and this sounds too good to be true, but I think most of it's true. It was wood from a warehouse, the floor of a warehouse on the south side of Chicago that what's his name? I wrote some notes here. Ken Dunn had rescued. And the story is that he was riding his bike, and this flatbed truck full of these boards was coming down some street on the south side. He flagged it down on his bike and said, I want to buy that wood. I'll give you a check, just drive it to my place, my resource center place. And he did, and Big Fish Furniture used that wood for untold number of bookcases in this neighborhood and our cases at the Newberry Library. So again, a local store. And I should mention that Chip Davenport, building the bookcases for us at 57th Street Books, led to a whole nother business, 57th Street Bookcase and Cabinet. He ended up building literally hundreds of thousands of bookcases and cabinets in this neighborhood throughout Chicago. When I walked home, I shouldn't admit to this, but when I walked home from work at bookstores in the evening during the winter when the lights were on in the apartments, I could look in and see all these bookcases built by Chip Davenport. In 2008, there were a couple of other momentous events in the history of the co-op. One, a customer was elected president of the United States of America. That generated so much publicity for the co-op and so much media attention. Reporters from around the world wanted to know who this person was and what books did he buy. I have to compliment the bookstore staff, the entire bookstore staff. Nobody ever answered that question because we couldn't tell anybody what other people bought. We always said he bought good books, just like we stock. Not he and his family as well. I was even, and also, who was this person who was a member of a cooperative? This was a question asked mainly by European press, because co-ops were bigger in Europe than they ever were in the US. I was even asked to go to, I think it was Naples, I certainly didn't do it, to a meeting of European cooperatives and talk about the President of the United States as a co-op member. I had nothing to say. I'm almost over. At the end of 2008, there was another momentous event in the history of the cooperative. The University of Chicago bought the building that the Seminary Co-op had been in since its founding. What is going to happen to the co-op? Well, there was a lot of uncertainty, certainly. And where could we move? Or would we just consolidate into one location? There were two co-op board members at the time, Winnie Sullivan and Dick Powell, who, as I understand it, went over to Bob Zimmer and suggested the location we're in now. He agreed, and then we ended up moving over there. A move that was paid for entirely, and I mean entirely, by the University of Chicago. The move, the build-out, the architectural design, everything. It was an amazingly good relationship we had with Chicago. Once again, we had to decide on a designer for the bookstore, and this was a little, definitely an order of magnitude different from the other two locations, because the big kahuna was in all that and owned the building. The university put out proposals for design, and four architects answered that and made proposals. One of which was Tigerman and McCurry, Stanley Tigerman and Margaret McCurry. Steve Wiesenthal, the university's architect, was a big part of this, and David Green, Zimmer's associate, was also a big part of the decision. We listened to all the proposals from all these four firms, and ultimately chose, they made interesting proposals, but ultimately chose Tigerman McCurry, in large part because all the others were really about how good you are, and we want to maintain how good you are, and so on. But Stanley, as was his wont, did not go that route. He had interviewed Neil Harris, a longtime customer, whom I'm sure many of you know, and asked Neil about the co-op, and Neil said, well, it's okay, but it could be better in many, many ways. And that's so Stanley talked about what his work as an architect could do to make the co-op better, as opposed to preserving what was good about it. And that was a game winner. So we chose him. Art Sussman, another co-op board member at the time, was our point person with the university, and it couldn't have been done without him. We opened up there in 2011, I think, and that's where my story ends. Thank you for listening.
No apologies necessary. I think this is the soul of the Hyde Park Bookseller community that you're talking about. So maybe Jeff could come next to add his bringing the co-op back further forward into the recent history.
Sure. I have a much shorter history, and I will share a much shorter history right now. I think I want to just start personally saying, thank you to this community for creating the environment that supports these bookstores, and also thank you to the panelists whose bookstores I revere deeply, and I spent a lot of time in bookstores throughout the country. I'm a student of the trade, but I'm also an enthusiast personally. I love bookstores, libraries, and anything related to it. And there are really very few bookstores that come close to what three of you have created. And I'm in awe of the work you're doing. And I'm really trying to do my best to somehow shepherd these things forward in that spirit. I first went to the old co-op when I was 19 years old, and I have very strong memories of that experience. It was just the most magical space, and what was so special about it, and the free stores actually, was that it was just books. It was nothing else, just books. And the books that were featured were not books that one might see elsewhere. I grew up in New York and had quite a bit of experience in great bookshops, but there was nothing that matched the seriousness of what I saw in this community and the reverence for these, for the browsing experience. So I essentially ended up becoming a bookseller, backed my way into it. I didn't know what else to do. I was in bookstores, I loved doing it. Did it around the country. I was on the West Coast for most of my adult life. And during that time, I did what I could to replicate what you, Jack, had done at the co-op, thinking that this really was the platonic ideal of a bookstore and what I was hoping to bring to communities in Seattle, the Bay Area, and Berkeley, and Stanford. And we never quite got there, but we were always trying to get close. And something that is remarkable to me, thinking about the director, like this position in the co-op. I think there have been 4 of us now, and John Moscheidler, who's I think still in the neighborhood, comes into the store regularly, and he'll tell me that the best thing he ever did was hire you, Jack, which I trust to be the case. And then to see Richard here, who spent 40 years as well, helping to steward these institutions forward. And we have a number of other people that are in the neighborhood as well that are still part of it. I mentioned Rodney Powell. We also have Suzette here, who was a manager of 57th Street Books, and Kevin, who was a manager of 57th Street Books. We have Jenny, who is a future manager at the bookstores. It's just an incredible community of people who revere these stores and want to do what they can to bring it forward into the future. I'll say that. And the last thing is, the work of being a bookseller in the 21st century is a little bit ridiculous. It is not necessary the way that it once was. Nobody needs bookstores to buy books anymore. And so what I hope we'll talk about a little bit today, I'm excited to hear those thoughts, is what does it mean to be a bookstore in 2019? And that is something that it's not the same answer today as it was when the stores were started.
Why don't you go next?
Okay, very good. I have a little different story or trajectory in my place in the book trade. Starting from a very traditional sort of thing we've been back for centuries. And that I mean training an apprentice by a master.
Excuse me, could you speak a little louder?
Yeah. My mentor, Mr. O'Gara, Joe O'Gara, had been an apprentice himself back in the 1930s. He had trained with a guy named Gerald Nedwick. Gerald Nedwick had been an apprentice of a man named Mr. Donahue back in the 1890s. So in Joe's mind, he came to a certain point in his career where it was time to pass the torch. And by the torch, I mean the accumulated knowledge. Anytime one gets into any kind of a business, the possibility of failure is great. The idea of cumulative knowledge means that all the mistakes you could possibly make don't have to be made, because many of them are addressed by your training. You're able to avoid a lot of the pitfalls. So, as was mentioned, I came into Joe's shop first as a book scout. I was doing that to finance my habit, and I was spending way too much of my small income on buying books, usually at resale stores, 50 cents or $1, Goodwill, Salvation Armies. And somebody told me that if I were to bring some of the books that were quality, that I wasn't necessarily personally interested in, I would be able to sell them and therefore cover the cost of the ones I wanted to keep. So that's what I did. And I first discovered Hyde Park because people told me it was the mecca for books. And lots of bookstores. And I certainly found that to be true. I was at a point in my life where I was looking for place. They trained me an art teacher. I wasn't finding a position. There was a lot of teachers at the time I got out of school. And I was looking for something to sort of latch onto. Conversation in Joe's bookshop, and we already ascertained that I had a good eye for books, led him to offer me an apprenticeship. Already at that point, he was thinking of retiring at some point, and the need to transition the business generationally came up. And the idea was that I would basically buy stock. He was a great mentor. He trained me in a traditional way of looking at books. I recall one time when I was still sort of on trial. I was in the back room of the shop, and Mr. O'Gara came from the front and engaged with the professor who was browsing through our mysteries. And the professor asked him, "How's that young guy working out?" I was sort of the fly on the wall in the back of a very thin wall bookshelf, and couldn't help but hear his response. He said, "Doug has what's called a nose for books, and that's something that you can train if it's there, but if it's not there, you really can't do much about turning a person into a bookseller." And so at that point, I agreed a little bit more easily. At the time I finished my apprenticeship, Joe made me a buyer for the bookshop. He did not like going out to people's houses, engaging people. He was a very quiet, private person. And I tended to be that way as well, but there was so much wanting to be engaged in acquiring books. To me, going into an attic that hadn't seen the light of day for 30 years and going through several thousand books was my idea of adventure. And I was just quivering with anticipation to be able to do that and actually get paid for it. So the whole thing just went down. Hyde Park was an amazing environment. I'm sad not to be here anymore, but there's reasons for that. My wife oftentimes would voice a certain amount of envy and jealousy that I got to be in Hyde Park on a regular basis, talk with Pulitzer Prize and Nobel Prize winners, just like they were regular people or something. And I certainly knew what a privileged position I was in, what an enriched environment this is and always has been. And it made me a bookseller that I never could have been without the experience that I gained on a daily basis here. I wasn't naturally a businessman, but I realized that I had to bend my personality to basically become a good enough businessman to be able to continue to do what I love to do. And I did for 42 years here at Hyde Park. And when we moved the shop, I did so reluctantly. I'd been driving 2 hours a day for 25 years. Getting older, getting close to retirement age. The booksellers never really retire. There's no pension plan or golden parachute waiting for us. So I did want a quieter life. And we had a bookstore, a second bookstore during the 90s in Chesterton. And so it wasn't so fearful jumping off into an unknown environment. I knew we could sell scholarly books out. We had that experience already in the 90s. And I knew we could also sell very popular books, which was less easily done here in Hyde Park. So we made the move, and with all the skills and experience that I gained by being a bookseller in this rich and intense environment, I've been able to do quite well in Chesterton. There's also quite a diaspora out there of people who have some connection with Hyde Park through the Dunes communities, and in Valparaiso University and Purdue University. So we have been able to survive even after our move. But I this day I miss Hyde Park, and I try to get back there on the most flimsy excuse that I can find, just to sort of go back to nostalgia and reminisce, meet old friends on the street. So that's my trajectory through the book trade. There's lots more to be said, but I really
And now we'll get we'll bookend with the preeminent and rare bookseller in still in Hyde Park. Yep.
I want to thank the Historical Society for inviting us all here, and specifically for Dottie. I think she was a really driving force in all this, so I think she really needs to be recognized. I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a thought about what bookstores in Hyde Park were like and what was going on, but kind of wanted to let you know kind of Mike Powell's starting of this. But one of the things that when we first got here, I brought some of our the University of Chicago used to be very involved in trying to help us get lots of different bookstores involved. So afterwards, you might want to come up and see some of the stores that both Jonathan Kleinbar was a real friend to the bookstores, and Bill Richardson. I'm not as sure that the current administration is as interested in books, but that's something that I think maybe we should be discussing a little bit later on. There have been lots of stores that were here before: Stavers, Scholars, Luke Herron's, Ex Libris, Crocs and Mercados, Barnes & Noble, the Zeppies, Borders. They came and went and moved around, and Jack mentioned a few others. As I heard the others talking, I kept on feeling like, I wanted to say that. So I'll kind of bypass some of that and just say the things more for me. Powell's bookstore is started by Mike Powell. And Mike Powell came to the University of Chicago as a graduate student. That's a common theme. I came as a graduate student, so Jack and some others. So he came in political science in the early mid-60s. And then he, at some point, started running a bookstore in the Rowles Club as a student activity. But the problem with Mike was he did it as an entrepreneur. He did it to make money. He did it in a way that was a little bit embarrassing because there was also school money involved. And so at some point, the university said, could you please just go away? But there were a variety of people at the university who felt that we didn't want to lose a talent like Mike. So there were at least three very specific people, Ed Shills, Morris Janowitz, and Saul Bello, who helped find Mike a place that he could open up a store, and also some funding. It wasn't a lot of money to do it. And he's still to this day very thankful of it. And they helped him get to half of the space over just across the street on 57th Street, half of the space at 1503. Now, a lot of people will remember that we were on the east side, but on the west side was a firm called O'Gara's. So we shared that building together that had been owned by the Shortalls. And on the west side was O'Gara's that did new books, hardback books. And on the east side was Powell's. We only did paperback books. That was a situation that was kind of contracted in, but it wasn't going to be great for Powell's because we needed a little bit of extension. So when O'Gara's moved down the street to Woodward's, it was a great thing for us. We expanded and got a bit bigger in our current space. After his first year there, Mike Powell took a vacation into Eastern Europe, and he had his father, who was a house painter in Portland, Oregon, came and watched the store. And this was Walter Powell. And Walter felt that selling books was way easier than scraping and painting. Now, I don't think he remembered that other people went out and shelved the books, and he just sat at the register and rang up the sales. But he felt like that was a really great way to do business. So at the end of that summer, he went home to Portland, Oregon, and opened up in 1971 a store. Soon thereafter, in the 70s, Mike Powell bought a very large library jobber named Richard Abel, who had a couple 100,000 scholarly books of library note. And Mike needed a place to put them. So he got a warehouse at 1020 South Wabash, and we slowly were selling books out of the warehouse there. Then Mike decided that at some point he really needed to go back. Well, actually, he had a child, Alice, and I'm sorry, Emily. Alice is his wife. Emily, he had a child, and he lived in South Shore. It was during a little bit of a tough time in South Shore, that things were not so easy. So he wanted to move back with his father. So he took a couple 100,000 books from us and sent it out to Portland and went out that way. A gentleman named Mike McIntyre became the manager of Powell's, and Mike was the manager for 3 or 4 years. Then Mike decided to open up a store in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Mike Powell, I think being very wise, felt that he didn't want to be an absentee owner, so he offered me a chance to buy into the business. So I had been there for a while, but then I bought into the business, in 1984. And at that point, we kind of took, Powell's had been a traditional sort of used bookstore where we bought books, sold books. I took the Powell's in a little bit, two different opposite directions. We were more involved with what's called remainders, and then all antiquarian books. Let me explain what a remainder is. When a publisher, when Mary can't sell all the books to Jeff, at the end of the day, the publisher's done 10,000 copies of a book, and they have sold 7,000. They have 3,000 left. They turn around and sell them to someone else on pennies on the dollar, and those people then turn around and sell them off to other people. That's what a remainder is. So we were very involved with remainders, and then we were very involved with antiquarian books, buying up rare books. I became a member of the ABAA, the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America. We opened up a store on the north side in 1987, and I thought I knew about bookselling, but I think what I knew about was Hyde Park bookselling. And Northsiders didn't quite have the same picture, but we did all right until all of a sudden, about a year after we opened up, there was this store called Borders that opened up, and people kept on telling me that they stole away my customers, and the reality is I had borrowed their customers ahead of time. So that store, which we were open for 27 years up north, but our sort of bookstore didn't quite work up there. In 1989, we moved our warehouse from the 1020 South Wabash location that Mike had originally had, and moved it to 828 South Wabash, which was the old YMCA building. And there we were able to have both the retail outlet on the first floor and the warehouse below, and that worked out very well. Then in 1991, the biggest thing for me in a way was we opened up a trade show called Serobe. And what Serobe is a show for buying and selling remainder books. So we had people coming in from 42 states across the country, from like 18 different countries. People would come in and buy these books, and it was a very successful time. There were other little specific things. We moved to a different warehouse, we moved to another warehouse, but that's not that important. But in 2001, we started putting our books up on the internet. This was a new thing to us, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about the effect on the internet, because it is for us both saving us and killing us. That people can buy books all over the world means I have customers all over the world, but it also means that my customers have bookstores all over the world. So it makes it a little bit more difficult. But well, we went online in 2001. In 2017, we did our 1 million shipment on the internet. So you can imagine how important that stuff was for us. And then in 2010, Powell's was able to take our warehouses, that we had 2 different warehouses, and our retail location that was at 828 South Wabash, and we moved it all to a building that we bought in 47th Street near Midway Airport. And that has enabled us to continue in the wholesale division as well as the internet. That's been the big growth in that. The only last couple individual things I wanted to kind of throw out there. Jack, I think, mentioned about Obama. One of my favorite remainder stories was I had met State Senator Obama at my daughter's 4th grade assembly. We sat down and talked, and a year later, I saw him at a Chamber of Commerce meeting. He remembered my name. He remembered my daughter's name, and I was just shocked that someone had that sort of memory. So I was able to, there was a Oxford list, and they were distributing a series called books from Kodansha, and they had 4,000 copies of this funny little book called Dreams of My Father. And I thought, okay, it's never going to sell, but I'll have it here in Hyde Park. So I bought 4,000 copies of this book for 22 cents a piece. And I brought it back in, and we put them up right at the front of the store to try to show it off. It didn't sell that well. But then all of a sudden, he was going to be running against Bobby Rush, and I called him up and said, look, can I donate some books? I want to get rid of some books. Can I get some books? He said, well, the campaign can't just take them. Just charge us whatever you got charged. Well, I was embarrassed to tell him that. So I charged him $1. We shipped him books, and then I made donations on the side, so it made me look like I was a bigger donator than it really was. And then as he became more popular, when he had the keynote address at the Boston show, the campaign kept on directing people, because the book was about to be reprinted when the convention was going on, but they didn't have the books in hand, so CNN or NBC, everyone was calling us up, bringing in these books. And then years later, when he had his new book coming out, and I stood in line at 57th Street Books to see Dreams, or Audacity of Hope. I walked up, stood in line, and he stood up and shook my hand. And he turned to the Random House guys and said, "This is the guy who bought my remainder of my first book." They were terrified. But I think some of that story speaks to a variety of things about Hyde Park, about the celebrities we see. It also speaks to how remainders fit into things. But I'm going to cede the rest of my time to some of Mary's questions.
Well, it also shows you the unpredictable journey that a book can have in terms of a first life and a second life and a third life, or not, as some of us know. So I have one question for you, Jack. I want to know what happened to all the saran wrap at Stavers.
Excellent.
I don't know.
I don't know if everyone knows, but this is one of the most peculiar stores I'd ever called on, because all the books were behind shelves and shrink wrapped, and you basically sort of had to put yourself out there to beg to see a book before you bought it, and so it was just the complete opposite of what, table display and stacks of books, and you really felt like they were precious objects, but you also felt like you were really making a big imposition as a customer to want to see if you wanted to buy this book.
That was one of the biggest issues when we opened up for these books, because Elaine stayed with it from the store for a long time. And Jeff Boley just didn't want you to do reviews. He thought more could be done there. So it was a tenuous time. We wanted to make sure we treated everybody nicely, but on the other hand, we didn't want to do the business. And I'm going to bring up Rebecca Janowitz again.
So you sent me over there to talk to her.
You were such a great middle person. Everybody was happy because of Rebecca.
Great. So this will be more of a sort of a freewheeling discussion in terms of, and we are going to allow plenty of time for questions. Oh, sure. Well, I am the ringer. I've lived in Chicago as a North Sider since 1979. I came down here. I was an English major in college. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. I assumed I was going to be a prominent editor in New York at a New York publishing house at some point, but I didn't quite know how to get there from Minnesota. I was working at a part-time college job, and that boss recommended I speak to someone who said, I have one publisher client. It turned out it was the Bookman in Minneapolis. That was my first job out of college. And they were the sons of two wholesale produce. They had a big near north side produce, and they called themselves the Bookmen. And paperbacks were a new thing. Not sure if it was going to work, but they started selling paperbacks out of one room in the produce warehouse to supermarkets and any little shops that they could. There were some bookstores there, but there weren't, university stores and grinds and a few stores downtown and whatnot. Dayton's had the department store, I think the book department. That's an interesting phenomenon, by the way. Dayton's, Hudson's, Marshall Field, remember those palatial floors full of books and customer service. Anyway, then there was this sort of startup company that was part of Dayton Hudson called Target, and their foot in the door was these Target stores that were really doing a wonderful business in books, particularly in children's and bestsellers and books and lifestyle books. So their business grew and grew, but that whole area of the business is pretty much gone now in terms of small regional wholesalers who would deliver books in a pretty narrow geographic area within a day. Now there are two big wholesalers who have bought up all the small, either the independent IDs. We also were magazine distributors. They were an interesting book selling experience, shall we say, because they were selling books. Probably my oddest remembrance, my father was a policeman, career officer. He turned out to be the head of a vice squad. I was always afraid that I would run into my father making a raid on Schindler's because I'd have to walk back past all the pornographic magazines to get to the book buyer's office and sit in the warehouse there. And they did a pretty good business in periodicals and best-selling paperbacks and things, but it was such a difference between coming to someone like the Seminary Co-op or a religious bookstore in Goshen, Indiana, and then you're also in the back of the magazine shop. So that was pretty funny. So I wound up working my way up to sales manager in Minneapolis. Then all these book reps were coming up from Chicago. Chicago was sort of the base, especially since Crocs and Brentano's was such a big, dominant force. They were the largest book-selling chain in the country at one point, and at that point, and they were really in their heyday. So a lot of the people that went to New York to have careers in publishing Chicago was almost like a farm team in terms of the big, important rep jobs. And at that point, a lot of these guys were still, they graduated to the automobile, but they all told stories about going out on the train for 3 weeks at a time, sometimes as a group, and all staying at the same hotels, and sometimes even covering, if they had a bad night that night, their friend might take their catalog and sell their books to the customer while they recuperated. So it was a very male-dominated industry. There were just a few women, one in particular who I was impressed with, who came up to Minnesota. Suddenly they were starting to hire more women as sales reps. Well, that's a good business in New York. Then I got into business. It turned out I loved being in sales. Chicago was a great book town, and I just, made my whole career here, working for some publishers. I basically worked as a commission rep, which is you're an independent contractor who usually works in a group. There's another here who's still doing that kind of work. You basically form contracts as a group to give coverage to a publisher and then another publisher, and then you have a pretty, what you call your bag of publishers. And I was lucky enough to be selling at one time I was selling for Workman, Harcourt Brace, Houghton Mifflin, William Morrow, Houghton Mifflin, and then some smaller specialty and independent publishers. From there, I took that was a pretty grueling job, because at that point you had a stack of 50 catalogs and maybe 50 or 70 customers scattered all over the place, everything from small little stores to large chain stores like Crocs and Brentano's. I decided that I needed to get off the road and take a little respite and work in a bookstore. And it was the hardest job in my life, I will say that. I was the children's manager for a very active and strong independent bookseller with a thriving children's department up in Winnetka, my bookstore, which is still quite strong. But it was a difficult and challenging job, and I think it was really useful for me to see what that was like. I'm constantly going back to those days in the career where we were. I was always on the, except for that stint in bookselling, I was always on the distribution and sales side. And people think that the publishers think you work for them. In truth, the sales reps work for the booksellers. They're really the one you have to know. How do they want to conduct their sales call? What kinds of books? It's a very trust-oriented relationship, because if you recommend too many of the wrong books or push too much of the wrong thing, you don't have that relationship. When you really believe in a book and say, this is going to be something that you really need, it's something you build up over time. And I stayed in the business mainly because of the people I worked with and the people I met, and the wide variety of information that was coming at you about all different kinds of books and on this. So anyway, I think we should get back to the main topic here, which is Hyde Park bookselling. And we've touched on a lot of this, but maybe we can flesh out a few more things. Let's talk about online bookselling and how electronic digital publishing and services, not just you're both dealing with sales going more and more to bookselling, but also digital content being transformed in many ways. So, anyone want to jump in?
Well, I think that there's too many different things going on, and it's hard. You're talking about the e-readers or the people who are reading books online, and everyone told me 15 years ago the book is dead. It's all going to be electronic, and it didn't seem to me to make that much sense. But that's what everyone was saying. That hasn't happened. But what has happened is that you can find books electronically on the internet. So what the fear of 15 years ago, I think, has gone away or has changed. But there's been an ongoing change of what we're fearful of. I'm not sure that Amazon is that much different. I mean, it's bigger in that way, but then when Powell first came in and people thought, oh, discounting, that's going to kill everybody. Or, the super shorts, whether it's Barnes & Noble or Borders, that's going to kill everything. And what has happened on each of these things is we keep finding a different equilibrium, that different places find their way. But right now it is a smaller way.
I think Brad's exactly right, and I want to share an anecdote from my time at Stanford. There's an incredible independent bookstore on the peninsula called Kepler's, which has been in business for about 60 plus years. And as a student of the bookstore, I was reading the minutes from the board of directors of the Stanford bookstore from some point in the 50s. And the argument, Clark Kepler was furious with the Stanford bookstore because they were discounting books. And they said, we're the only two bookstores on the peninsula, and it's ridiculous to devalue the work that we're doing. And I was reading it thinking, boy, these are the exact same conversations that we're having today about discounting.
Yeah, I think as a matter of fact, in the industry, ebooks, digital content had been rising and rising and rising, and part of that, I think, it turns out, was every book ever in print is a candidate for being transformed into a digital book. So there are a lot of classic backlist and other sorts of books that were being suddenly brought into digital, which sort of pumped up the numbers. It's still a very, very lively and thriving category, but it turns out that it's sort of plateaued now. Digital publishing is going down a little bit. Where it really has taken off is in terms of genre fiction, independent self-published authors who have a platform and a message to get to people, but it doesn't quite fit with either they don't like the traditional publishing model where you have to submit a manuscript and then wait 6 months and then it's another 3 months before the release of the book. These things can happen pretty much overnight. I worked for one of my clients was Triumph Books. They didn't know who was going to win the World Series until the night of the game, but within 24 hours, they had a championship book. They had 2 championship books with 2 different ISBNs ready to go, and as soon as they knew what the outcome and got a cover shop, they had a book within 48 hours on the shelf. You know, that sort of thing is happening in that, and they sell. Really what's happening is more and more, especially young people, seem to want, they like having a book in hand. You can't tell what someone's reading on an e-reader on the bus, you know, they're sort of a status symbol, they like the feel of it. So books are definitely holding their own, but there's been a lot of challenges. I think one of them is just content, as everybody likes to say. There's so much competition online, you can read so much online, everybody wants to be able to access this stuff for free. The amount of content that's available that you used to have to maybe only get in a book, and the amount of both time and money that a consumer has. You know, back in the day, you had a phone and you had a landline. You had, you know, and then you were spending money on magazines and newspapers and books and the occasional movie, and then maybe, you know, you had a television. Now you're spending hundreds of dollars on just your phone, your internet, your cable service, all of that discretionary income. A lot of it's going to someplace that, you know, that it used, streaming services, whatever it is. Books are a much, much smaller part of many people's lives, but thank goodness not as much here. So, anyone else have a perspective on either digital publishing or ways that print has been able to reinvent itself or reestablish itself on its own?
Internet sales of antiquarian books are pretty essential to a used bookstore now. I remember my first experience with the internet. It was a rather rude awakening. I had just bought a book, I think it was by John T. McCutcheon, and it was a humorous thing illustrated by his brother, and from 1912, and I'd never seen a copy in 30 years. At that point, I'd been in the book trade for 30 years. And so I thought, this is a wonderful thing, and I want to pay fairly for it. So I believe I paid $12 for it. And, but there was this machine in the corner of the room that I had just heard people were beginning to sell books on it, on various sites. So I asked my clerk to bring one of those sites up and see if anybody had this book that I hadn't seen in 30 years. So she did that, and what came up was 15 copies of that book that I'd never seen. And 5 or 6 of them were being listed for less than $12. At that point, I think I had an experience with many booksellers, probably had one way or another, that this is a brave new world, and that things are going to change really quickly now. We very quickly evolved a survival plan, which involved incorporating. We realized that a bookstore that just sat there static on the street, waiting for people to come in, and did nothing else, was probably going to flag and fail. And we began to put books online, and quickly evolved a strategy where it's essentially a 3-legged stool. We'd have the shop trade, we would sell books online, either high-value, rare books, or books that might not sell to our local clientele readily. And then the third leg was we have traditionally, for the last 40 years, used auction houses to acquire quick and remunerative sales for very rare books and drive the sales through auction. So it was basically a little store like ours, and I feel very small in this giant company, but a little store like ours needed a way to survive, and that was a strategy that was the only one I could think of, and it's actually played out very well for us. But the internet has really changed the world and the way people buy books. We used to have people come in and they would see a book and they would put it on hold. And then increasingly over time, they just would never come back for them. And what I began to realize is they were going home to their tabletop PC and they were looking it up and finding a better price than ours. and then they would just decide to buy that. A little brown package would come to us. What it's advanced to now is people come into your shop with their phones. And if you don't price your books competitively with what they can find online, right there in your store, they put the book down and walk out. So it's just changed the whole nature of things. Back in the early days, people used to come into a used bookstore, and books would traditionally be marked half price. So it was a $20 art book, it would be marked $10, and we would pay generally 20%. So we'd pay $4 for it, we'd mark it 10. That's what Joe O'Gara did, that's what virtually every used bookstore did. It was the minimum amount you would mark to stay in business and pay the rent. Now that's out the window, because there's Better World Books and thrift books and whatever, selling everything for $3.47 that isn't a rare, scarce book. So it's really changed the world, and all of us that have survived in it in to one degree or another have had to sort of deal with finding a way to accommodate that into our business plan.
Yeah, there's the bookselling, the term that retailers use for this phenomenon of brazen thing of people coming into a bookstore and then going, basically taking seeing a book they like and ordering, looking it up on Amazon. It's called showrooming. And basically, they're using the physical bookstore and the physical books as just a display catalog for their Amazon Prime account or whatever. And it's, most people have the decency to do it, to at least step away and be a little less more discreet, but it happens all the time. And I don't know if you know this, but Amazon has this thing, they have so many algorithms and various ways of trying to lure you in. One of them is dynamic pricing. A book will be, within 24-hour period, might have all these different prices. And of course, you'll see a book that they will list a new book, and then there'll be all these other resellers selling it. Some of them are selling the book for a penny and making the money on postage. That's how competitive some of this stuff has gotten. They make more money on the postage than the actual sale of the book. So it's been a real challenge for independents, and they've really had to, it's made the best of the independent booksellers much stronger, in my opinion. They've just had to be, they've had to focus on more things like author events, and maybe you can speak to how things have.
Before we move on to that, I would love to hear just a little bit about, because I know that in the past, historically, the mail order business at the co-op was tremendous and was shipped all over the world.
No.
I'd love to hear how the internet changed.
We had a very strong business of what we call mail order books. Even at that stage, they weren't all books ordered in the mail, but we sent them out. People would order in different ways, mainly either by phone. But we got an 800 number early on. That was a big part of growing the mail order business. We had two people who were devoted entirely. Whose job was Cindy Black and Andrea Dunn, whose jobs were basically responding to emails. That's the height of technology at that stage. And a lot of people used us to find books. They would write and ask for suggestions, email suggestions. I like this. What would you recommend in that? And so a fair amount of their time was spent responding to that in a sort of a traditional bookseller way. Well, you might like this, you might like that. We did, I think that Richard is here, he'll remember, could correct me on this. I think the most we ever did in a given year was around $900,000 in books we sent out of the store, ordered in whatever way. That was about the time when Amazon I began seeing these full-page ads in the New York Times Book Review for Amazon. And they were promising this quick turnaround, and I was thinking, we can't, there's no way a publisher can get a book out that quickly. But they found a way. I still remember the Friday afternoon, Thursday evening one week, Andrea asked if she could go home early. And I said, sure, but why do you want to go home early? She said, I don't have anything to do. It was pretty dramatic. The sales within a year had fallen off probably about 25 to 30% that one year. And they held their own. but it's not as, certainly not as significant a part, and Jeff's point is very well taken. Bookstores used to be the only way you could find out about books. And that was part of what we did online, let people know about books. Or they'd come into the stores because there was no other way. But information which used to be of great value became of no value at all because you could find it anywhere.
If you remember the big technology of the microfiche
Yes.
when I mean, there was no way to describe a book or see what it looked like or except looking it up on these, these big clunky machines, and all you got then was a little, that sort of horrible computer type with ISBN and price and publisher and publication date maybe. Now you look and you can see so much. The publishers and other places like Goodreads, all these different places that you can find out and follow an author on social media or something. There's just this wealth of information that you can get without ever entering a physical bookstore, and yet people continue to flock to bookstores, and because of that sort of third place that a bookstore provides to a community, and that part of independent bookselling, is kind of the heart and soul of it. And I think, what do you think that the that the Hyde Park community can do to help keep this thriving book community alive? Because it really is special.
I think the only way really is to patronize local bookstores. The question, there's been a growth in independent bookstores around the country in the last few years. Members of the American Booksellers Association has grown by, I think, 200 or 300 a year recently.
After declining for many years.
Declining for a long time. But the real question is, are people going to buy enough from them to keep them going? And that is the question that people I don't think anybody knows the answer to. But there are some good trends. It will never go back to the day when, Suzette will remember, the daily New York Times book review used to be a great driver of books, because people couldn't find out about it any other way. What was reviewed that day, people would come in and ask for. And Joan Novick's husband, Peter, would come in all the time asking about what was new. And asking, why don't you have this?
Yeah.
But it's also interesting that the quality of bookstores today are so much better than they were at one point. And I think that some of these problems have also created a much better situation. You were talking before about Cox and Jonas, and it was a great giant chain. The stores were pretty mediocre.
Yeah.
And by the time that Cox and Jonas got to Hyde Park, it was downright terrible.
Yeah.
And so they were great places to buy paper and this and that, but they really weren't good stores. And so while it's hard, I think what it's done to quality stores is to figure out what their customers want, and that people become the people are curating what people need. And so our case really have an effect, and I think that speaks to Hyde Park again, that some of it has to do with the customers, some of it has to do with the stores, that there's this interaction, and that's an interaction that doesn't often or doesn't easily take place on the internet.
Speaking of Crocs and House, when their store was on 53rd Street in Hyde Park, they still had a name in Chicago. And they hired, as a manager of that store, Gail Hilliard, who was an employee of ours at 57th Street for a long time, a very, very bright individual who knew what it would take for that store to be a success. But they didn't let her buy. They sent her all this huge quantity of books and stacks, books that would never sell in Hyde Park. They brought their demise on themselves. And with her, they had somebody who really could have made a difference for them.
But both the history of Crocs and, Barn or Borders, that.
I'm sorry.
No, jump in.
No, I just said, we were talking about, I've been around long enough to know Crocs and Brentano's more downtown than here. But of course, Borders was the last, Barnes and Noble runs the University of Chicago bookstores, right?
Right.
But Borders didn't do very well.
But partially it was at death fraud of their own industry. I mean, and so that's true of both about Crocs and Barnes & Noble, I'm sorry, and Borders. When they got to Hyde Park, they were already somewhat spent. And then they really
so
didn't.
Die completely.
That's right.
I wanted to ask another question.
Yeah, I think at this point it makes sense to open up.
Please.
Okay.
And we'll touch on some.
What about self-published books? Some of the books that we have purchased recently, both what I would call more glamorous books, and I'll give you an example of that, and very nice and important books. For example, the one about that Joe recently had about signs.
Ads.
Fading ads, yeah. And the most impressive one that we have bought recently and bought several copies, and one of which we gave to the library at the Art Institute, was a book on the Chicago Cultural Center, which contains wonderful photography by Kevin Edinger, who, by the way, lives in this community. And I first saw it online. I'm not sure what site it was. And because this is sort of an interesting story, if people don't mind a few minutes telling it. But I saw it online, and Chuck was the leading person of the campaign to save the main public library downtown that became the Cultural Center. So I noticed in that book, which you could see all the different pages, that the history that was in that book was not accurate. Because for a long time, the Daily mayors put out this myth that Eleanor Daly had saved this building. Some of you may remember that. And that's where Kevin got his information, was from the city. And so...
It was the Tribune that pushed that lie all the time.
Okay, well, that figures, yes. Anyway, we got in touch with Kevin and showed him our evidence that this was not accurate, and he changed the content of the book. This was on Blurb. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I guess the question that I would ask is, what is the policy of our booksellers about self-published books? Is it possible that they can get them or not? Or are there other understandings about that sort of thing?
I would love to try and answer this, and answer a bit in a broader way and speak to some of what Jack was describing about the bookstores growing, and we're at a point where bookstores are growing, which is true. Bookstores are growing because they are selling things that aren't books. And when we talk, what we call a bookstore is not really a store like what Brad and Doug and Jack built. And I say this with tremendous warmth and love for this community. You are all spoiled, deeply spoiled. We have 3 incredible bookstores, and if you leave here and you don't walk across the street like I will and go to Powell's and go shopping, you're making a mistake. Most of the new bookstores are carrying books. They're calling themselves bookstores carrying books, but they're also carrying a lot of other things. They own socks and notebooks and whatever.
Reading
glasses, and that's how they make money, if they make money. Most of them don't. Most of them have either a ton of losses or are independently wealthy. Why is that? Why are books hard to make a living off of? Is because they're really expensive to create, but they're expensive because they're worth it. And coming back to the self-published question, it takes a lot to create a book. It takes a lot to create a book of quality. It's not the price of the paper and the ink. It is a tremendous amount of professional work that goes into it. We do carry some self-published books that we think are high quality, for sure. But the entire industry of publishing is critically important, and one of the things that we're losing with the devaluing of the book is that infrastructure that supports it.
I'd just like to point out there's something you can't get with a self-published book. tenure, which is very important in this neighborhood. And I was raised, bookstore minding tradition. We're paying a lot of attention to bookstores because my father believed that bookstores were part of the equation that supported scholarship. And he believed that particularly that independent bookstores were part of that, as he believed in, and we haven't talked about it at all, the importance of independent publishing companies, and the smaller publishing companies, some of the best ones started out in Hyde Park. And that this was this synergy around books and around quality books. And I really think that it is incumbent on a neighborhood that has any kind of aspirations, individually or collectively, as scholars, to tend to their bookstores. And I haven't seen always the level of commitment that there ought to be anymore to that. It concerns me because if we don't have healthy bookstores that sell something besides those incredible greeting, and I always say, I'm not gonna buy any more goddamn greeting cards, especially not that cost more than $8. I come home with they get you, they lure you in, it's like a drink. I can't stay away from it. Because I buy these ridiculous tchotchkes that you're all selling. It's terrible. But the point is still books. And the point is still how having the bookstores serves the overall purpose of
To Harvard, speaking on both sides of my mouth, I had my best order from the University of Chicago Library in years.
They shouldn't buy from us because their budgets are being cut and they want to get as many books as possible into the library. But why are their budgets being cut? Is because students are using the libraries less and less. So I think that my answer would be like creating a culture of reading and books and supporting spaces of books nationally, it's not just a Hyde Park problem, is critical. And we happen to be here on move-in day. I'm glad anyone that braved all of the young students coming in. We are set up right now outside the library, welcoming all of the first years. To show them in this neighborhood a model of what it means to live in a world surrounded by books, and where people are actually buying them, reading them, talking about them. That is one of the things that's great about this neighborhood, and it's something the country needs.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, the whole idea of creating a culture for books and a community. I think that's really incredibly important, and it's sort of that's what we do in Hyde Park. I tend to go to the north side periodically with people. I know people on the north side. One of the things that I've seen Barnes & Noble start to do is, they sell an incredible amount of tchotchkes, but they also are doing more in terms of book groups, particularly with kids. You go into the Barnes & Noble's children's departments are getting larger and larger, and almost any time you walk in there during the day, there's some children's reading activity going on. So the whole sense of getting kids to grow up with books, getting families to see bookstores as being more than just shelves. I mean, one of the things, Brad, when you did your open house in your warehouse, it was like, I never wanted to leave. It was like, here I am with, 3 million books that I can touch and feel. And I think that's the kind of awe that you need to keep developing in families and kids forever.
Yeah, we just last weekend had our 32nd children's book fair on 57th Street. Thank you, Rebecca, for starting that.
Yep.
And we have, so to Jack's point, the vision in 1983 to start a store that had a children's bookstore that reflected the excellence and the comprehensive approach to inventory that the co-op had was incredible. We have a Young Readers Advisory Board at 57th Street Books now that Franny Billingsley, who many of you know, who's also an author and was the manager in the 90s of 57th Street Books and is now our children's manager at the store, has started and oversees, and that's to get the younger folks involved in reading. And I would, if you'll indulge me, I would love, Jack, if you would share maybe a story or two about the early days of the children's section and how it kind of came about and created that love of learning at a young age.
Well, one of the most important things at the beginning of 57th Street was choosing the people to do the children's books and giving them enough money to actually make it worthwhile. Donna Shad and Celia Leventhal were the two women who were the first children's buyers. The two of them together shared one full-time job, each working part-time. They did a great job. We had such a run, we had such a great run of people doing children's fiction with capture children's books for a while, and she went on to a great career in children's publishing. She's still at much other places. So definitely thought we could some too. So Angela Sherwood, great person doing children's books. Oh, Tara. Oh, that was speaking. I remember hiring her when she was an undergrad at Chicago. That was one of my best hires. She stayed involved from undergraduate age through. So we've had a real lot of real good people who engage the community and encourage the students. I remember when Angela Sherrill was fired, when the Obamas moved to the White House, and she was thinking, I remember her asking me, you think anybody ever will tell the daughters now that they shouldn't buy that, they should buy this? She was the last person to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's great that we're talking about the past of Chicago Hyde Park bookstores. Is anybody concerned about preserving that past? I mean, I happen to live now in Evanston, and a lot of you remember Truman Metzel, who's Great Expectations bookstore. After he died, his widow very graciously left the Northwestern University Archive a good collection of materials about him and about the bookstore, which was essential to that community, as many of these stores are to this community. I mean, Jack is just spinning all this stuff right off the top of his head. Is he going to sit down and write some of this? Are we going to have interviews with some of these people to preserve this kind of?
Right, that was a project which I haven't really done. You've given me the impulse. Yes, Joe.
I can't wait to read that book. I endorse that wholeheartedly. Everyone on this panel, you guys should all write books.
There were so many people in this community who were involved in bookstores over the years. It's such a great part of Hyde Park life.
Yeah. This kind of longevity in a bookstore, especially for yours, is pretty rare. They're really around the country, you know, and even in the world, there just aren't that many booksellers that have been through business for decades. Yes.
I want to defend reading cards. No. Reading cards are part of what keeps people writing, sending mail, and not just email. Even though there are sites on the computer that, are reading card types. In addition, we don't really have a gift shop, except, well, in the museums, but otherwise, maybe I'm just ignorant right now of everything that's around, but I use the 57th Street Books collection of reading cards a lot.
Yes, and I think you have to rethink your guilt about that. You are subsidizing a bookstore more by buying reading cards.
It's not, I think, just to say something. So our stores together have 98% books. There are almost 99.9% books at the co-op, and it's 2% non-book at 57th Street. Most good independent bookstores have 80% books. It's not, 57th Street is not the problem. Yes, it's enough, thank you for saying that, and we're going to carry more of that. Please support that by whatever it is that is still going. But most good bookstores have 20% non-book, and that's the problem. And that you need to do that in order to be profitable, because they're better markets.
I'd like to put in a plug for O'Hara and Wilson and Chesterton. I'm next. amazing. The only problem is that it's not here. Still bad at that.
Not that far.
But you
We were
do,
billed when we got there. I was a little embarrassed by this. Several of the local journalists write articles about us, and it was like, we got Chicago's oldest bookstore. It's like they tempted us away, or they thought, we were able to just be there, and they were so attractive. It is pretty much, people come to the shop all the time, and it looks almost to them. This space is very similar, and many people have a sense of deja vu when they come into the shop, because it's the same shelves built by Hyde Park Chip, and the same lighting fixtures. We just put a new strip on the ceiling, and it's basically the same configuration. And it still feels like Hyde Park. It's a lot of customers and people who know the shop there in Hyde Park come in. They feel very much at home. So
is the
the
bookstore?
legacy of Hyde Park lives on.
Does anyone remember the scribe? That was in O'Gara and Wilson.
We had a wax figure.
Oh, yes,
Just in the last 6-8 years of the shop here, and he sat about where that gentleman is, and he was gotten on one of my estate calls. He sat through my whole childhood in the Museum of Science and Industry in an exhibit which inspired me towards an interest in books and writing. It's called the Writing Exhibit, and it was originally exhibited in the 33 World's Fair by the Regensteiner family, who was big printers in Chicago. And when the 33 World's Fair was over, it was taken and installed permanently in the museum. I, one time, as a 9-year-old, lingered too long in fascination of him and his parchment and books, cathedral setting they had him put into, that my family moved on, and I was a lost child. And so I have very strong memories of him. But later, I was able to buy him from the family who had taken over from the Regensteiner family, and paid for the exhibit to be maintained at the museum. I was lucky enough to buy the whole exhibit, the writing exhibit, and other exhibits from his family. And there's no question but that Jerome, which is what we named him, would come to live in the shop. He wasn't quite so good a fit in our new shop, so if you ever want to visit him, he's in John King's bookshop in Detroit right now. Scary to people, a whole new population there.
Are there any other particular questions?
I'll just make one comment. I have to disagree. And I disagree with Brad a little bit. His assertion that the bookstores we have now are actually better than the ones we had in the past. I hate to be someone that's advocating for a world that's essentially gone. But there were a lot of very large independent stores. When I say good, I mean the question of selection. We used to have a lot of stores in the Midwest that were very large. Very comprehensive, selection of books that would astound you, compared to the smaller stores. And that whole universe is pretty much gone. And it's true, you can very easily find anything you want on the internet. That's very convenient, but it's not the same as the sort of, wonderful feeling you got when you went into some place like Paperbacks Unlimited in Ferndale, Michigan. And you found, Avon backlist books and, South American literature or something. You find books that you wouldn't see in any other store, or you can only see in a handful of stores. So that's never going to come back, you know what I mean? But anyway.
I think the trend has been for, certainly in places like Chicago, smaller, more curated neighborhood stores.
Right, and that's fine.
And they're great, but they aren't like walking into, say, Crocs.
Right. Crocs downtown store did have a great
That,
selection.
yes, that
Even
art,
though the branches were.
that art, Henry's domain of the art.
But I think it was section by section. There were a lot of, and we're talking, we also maybe talk about different time periods, because there was getting rid of inventory is the way bookstores, the chain bookstores figure out that's a way to make it work. And I think that's a real problem. And that is the advantage that the internet or the Amazons have, is that say you get a little bit of everything. And it seems to me the stores are now understanding what their customer wants and getting out there, including some socks and other sideline things, but having it all connected, I think that's where I think there is a better quality.
Yes.
Forgive me if I'm reading something somebody said before we get going late. But what I've heard about so far, which I agree 100% with, things about books, I'd just like to mention booksellers. In my lifetime, starting with me as a kid in high school, I've noticed that booksellers, and enjoying the fact that booksellers are almost all somewhere between the level of quirky and weird. And I think such people need to be preserved too.
We'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, whether it was meant that way or not. Oh, there were some, I as a salesperson going into stores, it was really just, every day was a different sort of experience. Especially in Chicago, that little north side enclave of Stewart's Rent and Carol Stoll's bookstore on Oak Street and Mary Dunay, we referred to as the Bermuda Triangle, which, and they all had their various, Stewart, notorious obviously, and he was the one that whenever we talked about remainders with him, he's publishers' mistakes, that's what they are.
We left off the Main Street bookstore too on Michigan Avenue.
Might be before my time, but Carol had the theater crowd, and they used to deliver books within, people would call up and deliver books within the hour to the, that was really a carriage trade store, as was Walton Books, and then Stewart with his book club and the children's book club that they did, that his daughter Amy ran, was probably one of the first in the country, I think, where they would curate books for young readers. It wasn't the most child-friendly store, but it was, they had a great children's buyer and a great children's.
Talk about weird and quirky, Carol and Stewart were two of them.
Carol Stoll, yeah, they were two. It was.
Walter Jacobson used to go into Carol Stoll's store on Oak Street after he got a haircut and ask her if he was okay. Should he go back to the bar?
She wouldn't mince words either.
Really?
I would just like to say one thing in favor of this brave new world of booksellers, which includes internet books, which includes independent bookstores, which includes Amazon. Something about being able to participate in a book club that can actually use as a book and out of print, and be able to get copies for everybody in the club through A-Books, which is just this vast collection of booksellers. And that's the kind of thing that this new world has done. I mean, Hyde Park is amazing. All these bookstores are really well made and serendipitously finding things. But we really need something.
I couldn't agree more. And just a tip for anyone that wants to support that network of independent bookstores, and Brad, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but Abe is owned by Amazon,
Right.
and Libris is not. And what I tend to do when I buy online, which I don't do very often, is I click on the bookseller themselves, figure out where it is, and then I call them up and make sure I can order directly from them. So I use it as a showroom, and then I call the bookstore. Is that the best way to?
Biblio was also.
Well, biblio.com. Biblio.com is not on there.
But I think the bottom line is, there's too much of us versus them on a lot of stuff. People, anti-chains or only independents. If people are reading, that's a good thing. If they're buying books on Amazon, that's a good thing. If they're reading things on ebook readers, that's a good thing. If they're using libraries, that wouldn't be so bad either. We don't have to think of these are good guys or bad guys. And I think, I want to still survive another 50 years, but you know, I think the bottom line is that we have a product, books that people like to read. That's important. And so I don't think we have to shame each other about saying I'm buying it on this site or that site, or that I'm doing it online. I mean, I've had people who complain to me, mostly authors, that used books aren't acceptable. They're sort of immoral because they're not getting their royalties. And there's a germ of truth in that. I mean, you know, I get it, but I think the better good is that people are getting books in people's hands is useful. And so there are a lot of these things that you can say, you know, remainders. Again, the author isn't getting as much royalties, and that'd be wonderful if all the books sold out, but they don't. And it's better than landfill. Is to get books in people's hands.
And books are expensive. They're more expensive in other countries, but they're also more subsidized by that. We're living in a country where this is not, the government is not helpful, and there isn't the kind of public support of reading
and sometimes there's also a rebirth of things because of these. Do that, and you know. In the record business, I couldn't afford real records, but cutouts were really wonderful.
Exactly.
And somehow that seemed okay, whereas remainders, you know, so I think if people are looking at books, reading books, I think that's really important.
And if a customer can buy a book that was $25 for $10, they wouldn't have bought the $25 book. So it's all, you know, we're all in it together. One of the sort of things that's indicative of this, I think, is that the American Booksellers Association, which was always exclusively independent bookstores, had a keynote speaker at their trade show last year, Len Reed, the outgoing president of Barnes & Noble. Nobody was helped really by Borders going out of business in this country. Nobody in the bookselling community really wants to see Barnes & Noble go, not even the independent bookstores, certainly not the publishers, because that is just shrinking the availability of books, especially in some suburban and small towns where it's just not viable for somebody. They haven't found their rich person to run their bookstore, and it's not economically profitable. So you know, we just have to make sure that the whole community stays as healthy.
The Barnes & Noble on campus is better, which very few of you, if any of you, either have ever been in, if you have, you haven't thought of it as a bookstore, is better than most community bookstores. They have 20,000 plus books, and they'd be the best bookstore in just about any other community.
It's true. It's just overshadowed by the superlative bookstores here. So, and it isn't maybe as good as it used to be, but.
I want to compliment all the booksellers because of the way they have addressed the peculiarity of Hyde Park. And we have the good fortune of being both a scholarly community and a bookish family community. It's very difficult to find a bookstore like 57th Street Books or like what Brad does in his store, serving community people. You can walk into the seminary and be next to a faculty member who's dragging along some colleague from Yugoslavia and pointing out what a great bookstore it is. You can find that same scholar on Saturday with his family at 57th Street Books or at Brad's store buying books for the family. All the members of the family buy books together. That's a very difficult task to serve both a scholarly community and a bookish family community, and we've been very lucky to have all of you to do that over time. And I want to encourage people to support that part, not just the scholarly part of our bookstores, but also the family part, which is really important and very rare and unusual.
A point, if I can speak, that came to mind when Jack spoke is the idea of a brick and mortar bookshop, an actual physical space where people can gather and come and discover things. One of the failings of online books is that you can't look for a book if you don't know it exists. Occasionally somebody will come to me and describe a book, and it will become very clear that they are describing a book they wish exists. And I usually end the conversation with, you should write it. But a bookstore, a physical brick and mortar bookshop, which all of we have had, is a gathering point. It's an agora of sorts. I remember being in the bookshop at any given moment over the years and having groups of customers, a group over there talking philosophy very fervently, and another group over here discussing a recipe that they want to try from a cookbook, and 3 or 4 different conversations, very fervent, very animated, going on at the same time. And this was when people get together in a space like that. Those kind of things can happen. And especially in a culture like Hyde Park, that's incredibly important to maintain that contact.
Yeah, I think that from the publisher's point of view too, this serendipitous browsing that happens in a good, well-stocked bookstore. You know, you go online looking for something in particular and find it and go away. You don't necessarily stumble. I never went out of a bookstore with only the book I was looking for. It was always something else that either the jacket caught my eye or that I saw a name or a blurb from somebody that I respected, and you know, it just that's the kind, and the less of that happens, the harder it is to get some of these books, help these authors and books find their place in the world. So, you know, keep it going, guys.
Joe has one last question.
This is a question for Brad. As you know, every year there's this giant book sale in the shopping center that has, 30,000, 40,000 books. Does that kind of thing pose that a problem for you, because these are all used books and thousands of books get sold there?
No, for me, people are out getting books, selling books, whatever. It's all good. I mean, I think there are. That's a fundraising thing. That's great. I think that it works well. I mean, and yeah, I think any way people get books is a good thing.
And Brad has helped the bookstore, the book sale by looking through books to make sure that some of the people we think might be special might be of more value, and either through a store such as his, or through other ways of pricing or of distributing of books that truly are unusual as you can find at the book sale.
Much to the dismay of the other youth booksellers who like to prowl those stores looking for underpriced books that they
I
can
never
sell
used to go to the co-op book sale because, not that I didn't want to endorse them and encourage them, but I always felt that I would undoubtedly have a customer at my elbow about to reach for a book, and I would get it first. He or she would realize they were going to have to come to my store and pay me 3 times as much. I didn't want to have to deal with that situation.
All right, well, I want to thank everybody for coming. This is what Hyde Park is about. And I look on this wasn't a program, this was a conversation. And I thank all of our conversationalists for joining us, our historians, our beloved booksellers. I thank you all for coming. On behalf of the Hyde Park Historical Society, I would like to thank Dottie Jeffries, who is the one who put together this get-together. And I look forward to seeing you at future events. And by the way, hang around, buy a bottle of wine.